want to start, as I always start, with a video that features the orchestra and in some way features our guests. Then I'll do my thank yous and acknowledgments, and then we'll start meeting our very, very special guests today. So that's an introduction to our artists. And also now, before we go too much further, I need to say a few words of thanks to a number of people in recognition. And one of which is I would like to do a special thank you to everybody at Morristown Medical Center, I guess it's called now. I wish I could remember everybody's names. They were so, the fact that I'm here, able to talk to you and do this show less than 2 weeks after such surgery, I think is a tribute to everybody who was there. And I can remember Lauren, and Jana, Val, Kelly, Elijah, so many that they were just such special people and took such great care that I just want to take this minute to acknowledge everybody in the Gagnon Cardiac Center and of Memorial Hospital, Morristown Medical Center. I also want to talk about the fact that, as I said, this show was designed to connect us, to stay connected during the worst of the times. Now that we're coming out of it, that places are open, we still need to support each other. Some of what we are doing is, I want to recognize the Madison Arts and Cultural Alliance. MACA has been a big supporter and is very important to the arts in Morris County and in Madison. The Madison Downtown Development Commission is working with us as well to help provide opportunities hopefully in the fall, some kind of low, minimal size opportunities, but at least opportunities through working at the Madison Community Arts Center. Brian Ferran recorded several artists in doing some solo work there this past week. And so Eric Hafen, a big thank you to you and for everybody at the Madison Arts Center for giving us access, and we will probably be doing some streaming. We might even do some outdoor concert or something there in the fall. I want to also recognize some of the places that have been helpful to me and us and everybody. Madison Bagel Cafe. It's one of my favorite places in Madison to go. Coffee for breakfast. Although I have to limit my coffee and my bagels for a while, so I'm not sure what I'll get. But they're one of the businesses reopening. Romanelli's, everybody, so many of you have joined us at Romanelli's for our wonderful parties, and they've done such a great job. And I know that, like the arts, the restaurants are good as well. Shanghai Jazz, one of the leading jazz places in all of the world, actually. And they're reopening, and everybody's trying new things. So we want to support them as well. Sound Ledgers is an accounting firm that is helping me with putting these broadcasts together. So I want to acknowledge and thank Andrew Massini and Sound Ledgers. I want to thank Evan Ardell and his financial services and the Ardell Institute for their help in putting it together. But most of all, and this I admit I stole from PBS, this is possible because of listeners like you. We are thrilled to provide a lot of this for free. We are providing some August concerts that we've been recording, and they'll be streamed for free. But we do need help. And so if you know anybody who maybe would want to sponsor a streamed concert, sponsor an event of some kind, or you just or would be willing to contribute and help us go, because the arts are hurting, as I'm sure everybody knows. It's no secret. We keep going, and we're happy to provide as much as we can to keep the music going, but we need any support, help and support possible. So those are my thank yous. Now I'd like to introduce our artists. I asked a couple of people for some questions or what they would like to hear, and what we did a couple of weeks ago that really worked well was just asking the guests, tell us who you are, how you got involved in music, what you do when you're not doing music, what composers, what music you like to listen to, what music you like to, what music maybe you prefer to, could be that you love playing this kind of music, but you prefer listening to this kind of music. Just let us know who you are. And since in my looking at gallery view, I see Laura first, why don't you start?
Okay, sure. Do a Cliff Notes version here. So actually, to get to part of your question, I actually do mortgage banking to earn my living, which is an exciting time right now. Another story. But I mean, I got into music, about 8 years ago. So I probably remember years ago, and I'm dating myself, on Sunday nights when the Boston Symphony Orchestra used to play on Sunday nights, watching it with my dad. And there they were playing Beethoven's Seventh Symphony. I was listening to the flute player, and I said, geez, I want to do that. This is what I want to do. So I was just very passionate about music at 8 years old, and got into high school, fast forward there, and really had two music teachers who couldn't have been more different. One was mainstream, one was not. The one who was not really got me into the early music, Renaissance music and Baroque, and actually still a very good friend of mine today, many years later. And I think, Bob, years ago when we played the Schubert for 5 flutes, as an example, as you recall.
Yes.
You said, wow, this is a really cool piece. Where did you get this? And I said, well, I played it in high school. And I think you said, well, what the heck, high school? Where did you go? I went to Morristown High School, and this is a teacher that I had. Again, he was not mainstream. So I think my heart is with the early music, the Baroque and the Renaissance music, playing the period instruments. Try to do that with Andrew and Nancy. But I'll go all the way out to Mahler. I love Mahler. So through those composers. But my heart really got into the Baroque music and the early music in high school, and we just did a lot of playing that you certainly don't see today. But at the time, it was pretty progressive with the part of this music teacher that I had. He was pretty much my mentor. Still a very good friend of mine today. So I think that's really, in a nutshell, where I've gone. Music is my passion. It's a release. We were just talking before the show started, Nancy and I, about it's a way to get away from things and playing music with your friends and your colleagues, and sharing ideas, and it's a passion. So that's a little bit of an overview for me. and I do have a degree in music. I have a music degree in performance. When I got out of college, and I kind of realized, flute players, there were a lot of flute players out there. I probably couldn't do a career out of it, so I did get into a different line of work, but I just never lost the passion for the music. So
Terrific.
That's my story.
Thank you, Laura.
You're welcome.
Nancy, why don't you tell us who you are?
Me?
Nancy.
Nancy, okay.
Hi, everybody. Yeah, Andrew, well, we'll go in order of highest to lowest, right?
That makes sense.
I got started in music because there was nothing else I was going to be doing. Both of my parents were musicians. Both of my sisters were musicians, and it just kind of became what I would do. My oldest sister was playing oboe in high school, and I heard her. She's 6 years older than me, and that was sort of the day I said, I can do it better than her. So that's kind of where I started on saxophone, and then I moved over to oboe and at the end of middle school. So right before my freshman year of high school, I started playing the oboe. Yeah, and I've been doing it ever since. I got 2 degrees in performance. And when I'm not playing, which has been a lot, I'm actually doing a little playing because I play a Facebook or a FaceTime concert for my dad every Saturday. He just turned 91 last week. So he's engaged, he's a musician. So it's the way I keep him sane, I think, is to play music for him. So I'm sort of still playing. I'm learning to play the trumpet and the French horn and the violin, which is absolutely hilarious. But I teach at a Christian school. I'm actually the band director there, so I don't know what that's going to look like this fall. But, I start instrumentalists, and I teach 5th grade through seniors in high school band and lessons. I also, teach introduction to music at Montclair State, and I teach a methods class at William Patterson. So all of that's going to happen. I hear Andrew's bird, who's trying to get in on this. His mom's bird. What do I like to listen to? I tend to go like Laura. I tend to like the Baroque music, and partially because for me it's uplifting and fresh, and I could sit and listen to all the Handel Concerti Grosso for hours. I could just put it on YouTube and just, it's background music or it's foreground music. It's whatever I want it to be. And I love that about the Baroque music. And I've also been looking at Corelli and a few other composers I've never heard of. So I've really been enjoying listening to a lot of Baroque music lately. What do I like to play? I'll play anything. I like playing just about any kind of music. In fact, I'm doing a little recording for a friend of mine this afternoon, Mark Miller, who's a wonderful contemporary Christian composer. So I'm doing a recording of the Lord's Prayer for him this afternoon. He's going to use in his service tomorrow. So, little work here and there. It's a lot different, but so that's my life in a nutshell.
Thank you, Nancy.
You're welcome.
Now, Andrew, it's your turn.
Oh my goodness me. So the reason I got into music actually goes back to when my father lived in New York City. And one of the cellists for the New York Philharmonic lived upstairs in the apartment upstairs. So he used to practice all the time. And if you know cello, it usually sits on a peg. So when he played, the peg was on the floor, and the sound, of course, in a New York apartment went right into my dad's apartment. And he fell in love with classical music. So he always had WQXR on when I was a little kid. And when it came time to start music, all of my older brothers and sisters played an instrument, so I did too. And I started, of course, on the little recorder, and then moved to clarinet. And in 8th grade, they started making me play lots and lots of high notes, which I don't really like all that much, especially on the clarinet. So they said, oh, does someone want to play bassoon? And I said, yes, it plays low notes, right? Because I sort of knew what it was, because I had been listening to classical music for years. So then I switched to playing bassoon, and that's been my primary instrument since 8th grade, really. And I played all through high school and did quite well, playing with all the local groups in addition to the high school groups. And then when I graduated high school, I didn't actually go to college right away. I was teaching Taekwondo, martial arts, and I was pursuing that as a career. And then somewhere along the line, I started going back to college to study biology. And someone found out, oh, you used to play bassoon. Why don't you play with our orchestra? So I was like, okay. I decided that's a good thing to do, and I started playing. And then my mom says, hey, there's this advertisement in the newspaper. I'm like, oh, what's this? It says, oh, orchestra in Booton. And then I went to the rehearsal, and that's when I met Bob, and I've been playing in the orchestra ever since. And I've always enjoyed it because we do a larger variety of music than most people, which you're talking about music I like. I like art music for the most part. I'm not so much into popular music and music that really has so much emphasis on heavy percussion. To me, it always sounds harsh. One of the hallmarks of classical or art music is that it's always a beautiful sound, except in very specific circumstances. The basis of what you make when you play, the sound should always be an attractive sound that people want to listen to. And that's not true in popular music at all. So my specialty is 18th century music. I've always loved playing it and listening to it, and I've studied it much more. When I finally went to get my music degree, I went to Montclair State University, and I have a degree in performance on bassoon, but I was also the secretary there for 10 years, and while I was secretary, I got a master's degree in music theory. So I studied a large amount of music, because in music theory, they make you study all this modern new stuff, most of which you don't really want to listen to, but you're supposed to understand it anyways. And understanding the music, to me, allows me to play it better. And that gives me a lot more satisfaction with playing it. And I find that the 18th century music has the most beauty in it in many ways. Even the Romantic era, it tends to me to get overly dramatic and overly heavy and out of balance. And it doesn't appeal to me as much, not that I don't enjoy it. And the same can be said of the 20th century music. I think it's even more hit or miss the farther you get closer to today, because there's so much more variety in music. So I was lucky enough that Nancy and Laura played with the orchestra, so I got to meet them there, and we've played lots of stuff together. The nonet that you heard earlier was a group that I put together because I like playing wind chamber music. I think it's so underrepresented, and it has a very different feel and sound than all the string chamber music that people are familiar with. And so now I fix woodwind instruments at a music shop, and I play and teach for a living, and it's not easy. So,
thank you, Andrew. That was terrific. I'm sure everybody enjoyed immensely. I asked a few people for some questions, like what would you like to know, what would you like to hear, and I kind of tried to collate those questions so that I have questions specifically for Laura, questions specifically for Nancy, and questions specifically for Andrew. So I'm going to go in that order. People are always intrigued by solos. They don't get to hear wind solos as much. When you go to orchestra concerts, you mostly hear piano concertos, violin concertos, or vocalists, sometimes maybe cello concertos. But there's a lot of incredible wind concertos and wind solo music. Laura has played several solo things with us. My favorite, and actually the best recording we have, is some Bach from the orchestral suite that she played with us a couple of years ago. So let me play a solo, the Badinerie, the dance from the orchestral suite. It features one of the most famous and fun. It's just one of the it's a piece of music I find I can listen to over and over and over again. And then Laura, maybe you could explain to us, how do you approach learning a solo? Excuse me, a solo piece that you're going to play with an orchestra. But first, let's watch it. how do you approach learning a solo? Is it different than just playing? I shouldn't say just, but it's different, much different than playing in the section. Just what are your thoughts?
Yeah, first I like to know, who the composer is and maybe what did the composer know about the flute. A good example is this Bach piece. Bach is very deceiving. And I was fortunate enough to, in college, I had my flute teacher she was a Bach player, flute player, a lot of Bach. So Bach technically is not very technically challenging, although it is played on the Baroque flute, which is only one keyed, it's a little more difficult. But the interpretation of Bach can be very, very challenging. And what did the composer know about the flute, for an example? And Bach didn't really. So the one thing that's very challenging about Bach, he was not a wind player. Bach never gives you the opportunity to breathe. So he thinks we can just play along like a string player and you keep going along and there's absolutely no places to breathe. So it's a lot about your phrasing and, where to breathe and where do you blend in with the orchestra and just breaking down the piece in sections, it's more technically challenging and you work it together that way. So I think I look at it from, what exactly did the composer know about the flute and their interpretation, and also playing of the style. You can't play like the Poulenc flute sonata in the same style as you do this Bach piece, for example. They're two different styles of playing. You don't want to play Bach in like a romantic style. So what the performance practices of the time. So you look at that as well. So that's kind of how I break it down when I'm learning a piece. Nope, we don't have you.
You're muted, Bob.
You're muted, Bob. Oh, there we go.
Now you're back.
Thank you, Laura. Nancy, your question is actually two parts. I've taken several questions and put them together. One question that comes to me, has come to me from several people, is when they look at an orchestra, they look at a violin player, and the violin player only plays the violin, and the cellist only plays the cello. But the wind players seem to play, flute plays the flute and the piccolo. Bassoon plays the bassoon and the contrabassoon. And the oboe is constantly playing the oboe and this larger instrument, which is, of course, the English horn. So that's the first part, is what is it like to be switching instruments in the middle of a piece? The second question is several of patrons were at our concert in November and have proclaimed to me that your interpretation of the second movement of the Dvorak New World was amongst the most beautiful they've ever heard. And I've listened to it over and over myself and agree. It was heart-achingly gorgeous. But the question they come to is, in addition to it, you switching instruments to play it, how do you approach a solo like that, that's part of an orchestral piece, that is perhaps one of the 10 most famous, if not the most famous English horn solo ever written? Make it your own and interpret it in a way that blends with the rest of the orchestra, is part of Dvorak's sound, and yet is all yours. And that's one of the things I think was so magnificent about that performance, is you took it and it was Dvorak, it was the melody we know, but it was Nancy's playing of it. So those two questions, the switching instruments and how do you approach playing a solo that's that familiar and that famous?
Well, thank you for that. Yeah, Andrew always tells me I'm really good at interpreting, and often I don't know what I do. I just kind of go in a zone and go. But I will say that both my parents were singers, so I had to take voice lessons. God awful, it was horrible. I hated it, but I took voice lessons when I was younger, and I really think that learning how to sing was a really big part of learning how to phrase and how to breathe and how to connect. So I think, going for a solo like the Dvorak, I mean, it's a song. It's a folk song. So, it's really learning to shape it in the way that the notes feel they go together. Sorry, my cat's yowling down here. She wants to be fed, so try to ignore her if she gets loud. You know, so a lot of what I do is just, it's kind of intuitive. I don't listen to a lot of other people play solos. Usually the only reason I do that is to hear how the harmony fits behind it, not necessarily to hear the interpretation of the performer. You know, it's really learning how to shape it by the rise and fall of the line. It's, I don't know, you know, Andrew says that it's kind of a natural thing for me, and I do agree with that. I try not to overthink it, because every time I overthink something, I can't do it. So I just kind of, I take a breath and I go. But that's a gorgeous solo, and it's well written. It's not easy on the English horn, and partially because the English horn has a tendency to be a little bit darker in sound, so it's harder to project the instrument. I'll talk about the switching in a moment, but you know, being able to rise above the orchestra and make it project is definitely the biggest challenge of that solo. So you really have to use singer's lungs to play it. That said,
I'm going to interrupt you for a minute. I'm
Sure.
sorry. Before you talk about switching instruments or anything, let us listen to that,
okay.
that performance. Really gorgeous. So now you can talk about switching instruments.
So basically the biggest difference between the oboe and the English horn is, if you think about it vocally, the oboe is a soprano instrument and the English horn is a tenor instrument. So in that general, thank you, Elaine, good to see you. The difference is the way that you voice it. In other words, the way you open your throat is a big part of it. So think about if you were to sing something low as opposed to something high, your tongue is different inside. So that's a big part of it. Changing the inside of the mouth allows the opening to be different and allows the lower kind of timbre to come through more easily. That said, the difference in the reed is also part of that too. So the reed is a little bit, it's slightly larger. Not quite as big as a bassoon reed, but it's on the way to becoming larger like the bassoon reed. So there's a difference in the way that you form your mouth to make that sound go through. So think of the difference if you were going to go E and ah, what happens inside your mouth. And that's kind of what I'm doing when I switch between them. So it's more of a breath in like an ah. So I drop my tongue and breathe in like I'm saying ah. And that really allows me to be open for the English horn. Well, that's really the biggest difference. And then it's just a matter of, muscle memory, right? Being able to go from one to the other is it's just a learned thing that you have to do. I guess it'd be a lot like a violinist playing viola. There's a little bit difference in the fingers, but you learn. When you do it enough, you do get better at it. Bob, you're muted.
Yep, now I'm unmuted. Terrific, Nancy. That was
Thank you.
Really, really interesting. Now we come to something completely different. Is that the Monty Python thing? Now for something completely different. Andrew Pecota. I thought, what am I going to talk about? I mean, Andrew switches from the bassoon to the contrabassoon, but it's not that often, and I don't have that many good videos. He's played several concertos. He's played my concerto for bassoon. He's played Vivaldi. He's played Mozart. And then it struck me. Not only does Andrew switch normal instruments, bassoon and contrabassoon, he switches to instruments that nobody else even ever heard of. So we have this instance here where Andrew plays instruments called the tenorune. And my favorite, which he played recently, which is kind of like a bass oboe. What's it called again, Andrew?
Lupophone.
The lupophone.
Sure.
Andrew might have the only lupophone in the United States.
It was definitely the first one sold.
Oh, the first one sold. But in addition to asking Andrew what it's like to switch instruments from such really different, from the bassoon to the lupophone, Andrew premiered a composition with Nancy about 5 or 6 years ago, composed specifically for Andrew, specifically for the lupophone. So Andrew's two-part question is, what is it like to switch from one instrument to another like that? And the second is, how do you prepare to do a piece that has never been performed before, to premiere a brand new composition? Before you speak, I'm sure everybody is saying, what in the world is a lupophone? So let me play a little bit of that performance. So, Andrew, tell us about switching instruments, playing new music.
All right, I'll start with the
and
new.
what is a loopophone?
I'll start with the new music part first because that's what we just heard. So that particular piece was actually, I commissioned it from Dr. Ting Jo, who was my theory teacher at Montclair State University. I've played several pieces by him, and I always thought his music had a particular flavor to it. It was him. Other people didn't sound like him, or he didn't sound like other people. So I asked him, and I said, I have this new instrument, and he wrote this particular piece knowing that I was going to play it on a new instrument. The instrument that I have, the loopophone, it's a modified version of the bass oboe, which is, of course, bigger than the English horn. But the maker has made this instrument so it plays out very easily. I never had to work hard to be heard while playing that piece, because unlike the English horn where you've got to work real hard to be heard, the loopophone, you're going to be heard. It's harder to play soft. So that was one advantage as a solo instrument. It was so easy to play. But it was so hard to play because I had two things going against me. I had no idea what kind of a reed to make for it because it was a brand new instrument. And I had to learn how to play the oboe because it's an oboe. It fingers exactly like the oboe plus a whole bunch of extra keys so you can play ridiculously low. And it was tough to learn the oboe fingerings. I don't actually like them that much, but now that I teach oboe to a student, I can do it. And it's so much easier to play now. But then I had to learn all of that. And then I went to my old teacher and we made, I don't know, about a dozen different reeds while we experimented on finding what would work. And I went to him because he plays the most closely related instrument to this, the heckelphone, which is another kind of bass oboe. And sort of the loopophone is an updated version of the old heckelphones. So when Ting Jo had written this piece for me, I looked at it, I'm like, okay, some of this is going to be easy, and some of this is going to be really hard. So I practiced gazillion times, because I wanted it just right. It was so hard. And then, da-da-dee, all the lyrical stuff, no problem whatsoever. I was like, I can do this even with the oboe fingerings. And this is a big, heavy instrument, actually. It's actually heavier than my bassoon. So one of the things you have to get used to is you put it on a peg to play it. And you have to make sure you control it because otherwise it will start moving in your mouth and the pitch will go everywhere and you won't sound good. This new piece, as far as it was new, it was still Ting Jo. I had heard his music and I actually had the opportunity to talk to the composer and ask him what he thought it should sound like. And he's a pretty open-minded guy and he's like, well, what can you make it sound like? And so I played different parts of it for him, and he actually, after this performance, he actually rewrote it a little bit because he thought it would sound better if he changed it. So it was very interesting playing a brand new piece that had a combination of sort of almost pixelated things with the brip, but and long lyrical lines. Playing it with Nancy made it so much easier because I never had to worry about the rhythm ever being wrong from Nancy, which when you're playing new music, being able to keep track of the rhythm while you're playing a brand new instrument with a funny feeling reed that has different fingerings, it's so nice to not have to worry about the other things that you've worked many, many years already on. So I spent hours and hours just learning how to play the instrument to be able to do the solo. And it was a blast. I was so happy to be able to play. I'm glad you were able to program it for a concert. And I had Ting Jo was there at the concert too, so it's always nice to have the guy you commissioned to write your piece there at the first performance. And then as far as changing instruments, changing from bassoon to contrabassoon, I think the hardest two things are you suddenly have this gigantic instrument in your hands that's really heavy. A contrabassoon is more than twice as heavy as a bassoon, and a bassoon is already considered a heavy instrument. And now you have to set your music stand up just right so that you can actually see over the instrument to read your music. So many times you've got it turned or you're facing sideways while the conductor's in front of you. And then the other hard thing is, like many of the really large bass woodwinds, air is a constant problem because you run out so fast. It's a big read, it's a big opening. You go, and you feel like you're out of breath in a half a second. So that's the hardest thing. The fingerings, you work that out in practice. But those two things, playing with the big read and figuring out how to adjust the position. And then, of course, the parts you get, you sit on low C. That's the kind of parts you often get, unless you're doing something where they actually have a big contrabassoon solo, in which case you spend hours and hours learning about 3 lines of music. So, Bob?
Thank you, Andrew. That was very interesting. One thing I'd like to share with everybody is back in December 2017, we were fortunate to travel together. And Nancy and Andrew and Laura and I, along with Paul Ziegler and Kevin Peters and Agnes, traveled to Venice. And we did 3 concerts in 3 nights. We did Venice at a Palazzo Cavagnas. Then we took the train to Padua and played at the Municipal Center in Padua. And then we returned to Venice to do this incredible concert at the Lutheran Church in Venice again. What I'd like to do before we talk about it is I'd like to show you some photos. If I can arrange everything here. Sometimes I forget exactly what I'm doing. So first I want to just show a few photos. I'm just going to skip through them. This is rehearsal, the first night rehearsal. This was the Palazzo Cavagnas. So that's Nancy and Laura and Andrew rehearsing. They're rehearsing. They played with a couple of songs with Paul and Kevin. And that's where we all went out to dinner, first dinner in Venice. And that's the performance night dinner in Venice. Most of the photos I have are from the dinners. At the train station on our way to Padua, obviously Laura, Nancy, Andrew, Paul, Kevin, the whole crew making it to Padua. And this is inside the Lutheran Church. There were so many incredible things to me about this entire performance, the entire trip. But the 3 performances is we were in the Lutheran Church, very small amount of promotion, and yet it was standing room only. They had to keep setting up new chairs over and over again in this absolutely gorgeous space. This is the Lutheran Church from the outside in the canals of Venice. And then this was the final performance dinner. And I got this really cute photo of Laura, I think. And I love this photo of Nancy and Andrew. And I would end this segment of photos with this one, except I learned when we got back that Andrew Pecota had made a purchase in Venice for something he claimed he'd always wanted. And I realized that has to be the last picture I show. This is Andrew in his Venetian cloak and Venetian hat. So it was interesting. And there's another picture of Andrew we brought our New Jersey sound and music to Venice. Andrew brought a bit of Venice back to New Jersey. Okay, so I'm not going to say anything. I'll just let Laura, Nancy, Andrew jump in whenever you feel like and talk about your memories. What you experienced? And Andrew, you do have to tell us about that cloak.
I mean, for me, if I can just start first, what was rather impressive is at the Lutheran church that we played at, their advertising consisted of taking a photocopy of the performance that night and putting it on the front door. That was the advertising for this concert, and it was a packed house. I mean, I don't know how many people they sat in there, but I have to believe it was 75 to 100 people in there. It was packed, which was so refreshing to see, because obviously here we're a little more spread out here, but all the advertising that you do, you're still trying to get people to your performances here. The other thing I will say, we were there in January. This was a stone church. And if you think 50 degrees is not so bad, try playing in 50 degrees in a stone church. It was cold. It was not heated in that church. But overall, it was really, I like to call it like a bucket list kind of trip. It was so exciting and thrilling to be able to play in Italy, 3 different concerts, and really a once in a lifetime experience with some friends and colleagues. It was tremendous. So,
yeah, I have to agree with that. It was so much fun to play with these guys, because they're friends as well as playing colleagues, and Bob too. It was just an enjoyable experience, because we were all there because we wanted to be, and we were just there to have a good time and share music. And the other thing about the Lutheran concert, they did a free will donation, and it basically paid for dinner for us. So that was kind of nice. But that was, I think, out of all the performances, that was my favorite, and partially because it was the hardest one to play. It was a hard, long concert, but the audience was just amazing. I mean, and the first one we did was also very nice, but it was a smaller audience. But that last one, that really was so much fun, just so enjoyable. And like Laura said, it was cold in there. And most of you know that the oboe is a wood instrument. Well, years ago, I bought a plastic top for my oboe, and we took the plastic on the trip, because you just never know when you're traveling what you're going to get. I brought about 40 oboe reeds, because who knows, and my plastic top, and that made me comfortable, and it made it a lot of fun to play. So it was really fun.
Nancy, if you remember, there was a couple there traveling, as we found out, from New Jersey. And they happened to go up to the door and see the poster on there and said, "Oh my God, Madison, New Jersey!" And so they showed up at the concert with their family that night from New Jersey. It was really very.
I forgot about that. Yeah,
that was cool.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I mean the whole trip was so fun, and traveling, because Nancy, Laura, and I stayed together. Traveling with them was an absolute blast. There were never arguments about things, and everyone was perfectly agreeable. We would just decide things together and go and do stuff. That performance, I think the hardest thing for me was sitting next to the violinist, because violin players don't breathe when they play. So when Nancy and Laura are ready to play, they have a breath in. You know exactly when they're going to play. The violin, they just go bloop, and they're in, and you're like, oh, whoa, I gotta jump in, and you're not necessarily as prepared. And when you're sitting next to them, you can't see when their bow is getting ready to move very easily. So you have almost no clue. It's almost like you hear them play, and you have to be right there. That was probably the hardest part of playing there, other than making your fingers move when it's 50 degrees and damp. The dampness would just suck the heat out of your fingers. I know that, Laura, that was really hard for you, because you're playing on a metal instrument that just takes it away.
And I have the gloves with the fingers cut off. I was wearing those, but my fingers just don't move in the cold. So we took our tempos just a little slower in that concert. We had to. So. But I mean, just the history where we were playing, the history. I mean, it's just so thrilling to be there. Yeah.
Well, and then we were in Venice, but we were playing in a Lutheran church, which was like one or two Lutheran churches in Venice, because they're mostly, of course, Catholic churches, because it's Italy. But that was kind of amusing. You could picture one of the composers, because the composers all used to go to Italy, having come down from northern Germany and actually being in that church that we played in.
Right.
Because most of the people coming from northern Germany were still Lutheran, because that's where Lutheranism was strong. So I don't think Bach ever did the journey down to Italy like that.
Oh, but Heinrich Schütz did.
Exactly, and many others.
He went to Venice and studied with Gabrieli, and he was certainly a northern Lutheran composer.
So he may very well have been in that church. I don't know exactly how old it is, but I know it was pretty old.
The church was 600 years old.
Yeah.
So, well, then he could very well have been in that very church, because there you go. Oh.
Yeah.
So,
That was about the cloak.
The cloak. So, when I was a kid, one of the first few books that I used to read all the time was Tolkien's The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. And everyone in those stories is always wearing a cloak to stay dry and warm in the bad weather. And since then, I have always wanted a cloak. I wanted to know, what is it like? So when I was there, we went into a couple of shops where they had all kinds of things. And there was one that had a whole bunch of different kinds of cloaks. Now, the cloak that I got is a traditional Venetian-style wool cloak. And now you think, wool? Why would you want to wear wool? Well, if it's properly made, it is incredibly resistant to rain, and it's really warm. When I was in the cloak and we were walking in that 50-degree weather, I was not cold. Because once you pull it around you, the only place for the air to come and escape is the bottom. It's very warm, and since that's what I wanted for years and years, I thought that was the best place to get it. And then we got the appropriate style hat to go with it for a 17th or 18th century Venetian gentleman, which is what I was doing, because Laura and I sometimes play Baroque music in period dress, and I figured, well, this will go perfect with that.
Wish I had that cloak for the concert.
Yes, you would have been a lot warmer.
Yes, I would have. Yeah.
Well, thank you all so much. We're getting close to time to say goodbye. So, but I do want to play one more nonet piece, because that's a whole different approach. What I want to play is an arrangement of a song called the Erlkönig, which was composed by Franz Schubert and arranged by Andrew Pecota. So we'll close with this little segment. But Andrew, tell us a little bit about what your thinking process was in making the arrangement.
Well, I mean, Der Erlkönig is one of the most famous songs in the literature, which has the singer has to sing 4 different characters in the same song, and then the pianist, because the original was accompanied by piano, plays the horse, which is the 5th character in the whole tune. And so the singer has to change their voice. He sings the narrator, which is usually done quite plain when they're singing. But then they also have to do a little boy, the boy's father, and then the Earl King, the Elf King. Now, in German myth from that era, the Elf King was often considered very similar to the impersonation of death. He was coming to get the boy, and the father had the boy on the horse with him and was running away, trying to save him. And I've always liked this piece. I was really introduced to it in my first theory class at Montclair State University by Dr. Ting Jo, because he always used it to say, this is through composed, when he was describing its form. And I have always wanted to make a version that I could actually play. So the nonet came to mind. And the hardest part is, and pianists hate playing this piece, is most of the horse accompaniment goes like this. 4 minutes later, bum, bum. And you don't get much break. The piano part is so active, it's really hard. Most pianists I know don't want to play the piece. And in fact, the composer, after he started playing it, decided to simplify it because it was too hard. But there are people who can play it incredibly well. So when I wanted to arrange it, I didn't want a singer because I'm not into the singing. And I'm like, well, a wind ensemble is perfect because we've got all the characters built in. The flute is the boy. It's a nice, high, pure sound. The oboe is perfect for the narrator. I think, what did I use? I did a couple versions of it. I think I gave the English horn was the Earl King because it's sort of fantastical and out there. And then I think I used the French horn for the father, big, heroic, because, well, the father's trying to be heroic. He's trying to save his son from the evil Earl Koenig. And then, of course, the bassoon and clarinet, we got the hard part because we had to go for many minutes straight. So I can double and triple tongue, so it was not necessarily so hard for me, but I feel sorry for my compatriots in the horns and the clarinets who can't necessarily do that, so they had to be able to keep it going. So it was quite challenging for the lower wind instruments. And I think I captured a lot of the character that each one, by having a different instrument, has a different character to it. And that, to me, is what the piece is about. It's about that story, but the music tells the whole story, even without the words.
So that's a good portion of it. Thank you, Andrew. That was, I think the arrangement is absolutely super. It needs-
One little thing. When you hear the English horn first come in, that's the Earl King. And what the Earl King is doing, he's trying to entice the little boy to come with him. So if you're wondering why death would be something so beautiful, he wants the boy to come with him, and he's playing very beautifully to bring the boy with him. It's not till the end where he takes the boy by force, and then it's all over.
Thank you. It was great. Thank you, Laura. Thank you, Nancy. Thank you, Andrew, for joining us
Thanks.
this morning. For those who have been coming, the next episode of Bach, Bagels, and Bob is actually 2 weeks rather than 3 weeks away. The orchestra does a summer music festival every year. This year, obviously, it's going to be a virtual music festival. It always opens the first full weekend in August. So what I'm going to do on August 8th, so that's only 2 weeks away, I have 3 singers. We always open the festival with an opera. We can't do anything operatic, obviously, this year. But I've got 3 singers who have sung with us at our summer festival operas in the past. They will be talking about what it's like to put an opera together, to stage it, to produce it, and all. So I hope you'll join us then. I hope you'll think of us when you're thinking about music, when you're thinking about art, when you're thinking about getting together. I can't wait to see you in person, hopefully in the very near future, certainly hopefully by springtime.
Thank you, Bob. That was fun.
Yeah, thank you, Bob.
Thank you, Bob.
Wish you all have a great day.
Take care. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks, Bob. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay.